I'm Leonard Hong, and you're listening to the Ultimate Growth Experience podcast. Dan is an elected new MP, and his story is simply inspiring. So he is a current National Party MP for Northcote. He is the former Fulbright Scholarship recipient to Harvard. He graduated Harvard with a Master's in Public Policy, former management consultant for Deloitte, former OECD Economist, and former strategy manager for Foodstuffs, and is also a fellow University of Auckland alumni. Dan, welcome to the TUGE podcast.
Thanks, Leo. It's good to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. So your life story is honestly one of the most inspiring things I've ever heard. So you went to high school, you were from a high school dropout to a current National Party MP. So you even had bone cancer at one point, that I've heard. So how did you go from being a butchery apprentice to becoming a highly competent, dedicated, excellent individual today?
Yeah, that's a good question, Leo. And just shout out to all the listeners that are on this podcast today. So I grew up in East Auckland and pretty humble beginnings. My parents are both small business owners. My mum runs a small B2B business, and my dad is a truck driver by profession, runs a small trucking company. And look, it wasn't really in my aspiration to do well at university or to even get to university. So I left school at 15. I was a pretty rough kid. I got suspended a couple of times. Spent most of my time at high school either wagging or in the detention room. So I decided to leave and do a butcher's apprenticeship. And that was through a connection that my principal gave me to the local butcher shop up the road from my high school. And essentially, 2 weeks into that apprenticeship, I got bone cancer. So I was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma. And so I was 15, diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, told that I might lose my leg. But fortunately, I was able to have chemotherapy. I had an operation. And 6 months later I was put in remission. So that was pretty life-changing experience, and quite frankly at 15 when you go through that experience it makes you think about your life, and I thought to myself I wasn't using my life to the best of my ability, so decided instead of going back to high school, which I didn't really like, I would go and complete my butcher's apprenticeship. So I got a butcher's apprenticeship with Woolworths in Newmarket, and did that over a 2.5 year stint. And loved business. I loved the commercial element to it and adding value and making customers satisfied. And through that, got to know the CEO of Woolworths and the senior leadership of Woolworths quite well, and was mentored to go to university. So at 19 years of age, I did a bridging course at MIT in South Auckland, Manukau Institute of Technology, and enrolled in a commerce degree originally at the University of Auckland. And the rest is history. I mean, I never looked back. After I entered university, fell in love with academia, had straight A's in my first year. Then went to the University of California, Berkeley for the second year. Then came back and I ran for student president at Auckland Uni. I lost, but then won student president the year later. So just became active and really enjoyed university life, just taking advantage of everything. I had known that I had failed in the past meant that I wanted to succeed as a student at university. So I think back to your original question, what was the difference? I guess having that experience early on of failure, wanting to dream big and actually aspire to big things, and then secondly working hard to achieve those. So I studied far more than my peers at university. I spent most of my time in my first couple of years in the library.
The general library, yeah.
General library, feeling that I had to make up for lost time. So, and I had to learn basic mathematics at university because I didn't really pay attention to mathematics at high school. Even things like, writing and reading well. So yeah, that's it. And, I think I always kind of dreamed of going back to the US on a scholarship. Never thought I would get there, quite frankly. So getting the letter of acceptance to Harvard University was a dream come true, and so I think the lesson there is always back yourself. Don't listen to anybody else, because no one else understands your potential more than you do, so listen to yourself and work hard to achieve your goals.
So did you get a lot of sort of psychological support from your friends and your family at the time when you were sort of going up the chain, if that makes sense? Or did people, for example, your parents, expect you to get to your position here now?
My parents are hardworking Kiwis, but they didn't go to university, so they really weren't in a position to understand what I was trying to achieve at university. I mean, I kept delaying my degrees. I ended up staying 5 years at the University of Auckland, so I did a BA BCom honours, and they kept saying, well, I think they were hoping just whatever the job was, it would be a good job. Mm-hmm. And then I got a job with Deloitte. I had 2 years there, and then I had aspirations to go back into study. And again, they really weren't, I think they were supportive. It's just that they saw the job market as being the end goal, which it is. It's just took me a few ambitions to get there. So I think the lesson there is just back yourself. And I did have mentors and stuff along the way, but ultimately you've got to take your own life you've got to take responsibility for your own life and work from there.
So individual responsibility, self-discipline, and trusting yourself.
Absolutely.
Personally.
Yep.
Right. So I heard you mentioned that you were AUSA President in the past as well. So what was that position like, and did that position lead you to have a political ambition?
What was the position like? It was a lot of fun. It was probably the most fun I had at university was through the year as student president. And the team, lots of lots of stuff on campus. I mean, you're at the centre of student life when you're a student president. So I had a lot of fun. A fantastic year to just get out and broaden my horizons. Honestly, I left my year as student president thinking I wouldn't go into politics. I think I was pretty disheartened by the backstabbing, the politics, as it were. So I wrote a cracking article for the student magazine, and my last cracking article said that I alluded to my aspiration in the business world. I wanted to go and run a company. So quite frankly, I didn't really expect to go into politics. I thought that business would be where I make my contribution. What changed? I think the financial crisis changed a lot of things.
The GFC of 2008.
Yep, so I started my job at Deloitte in 2008 and did a lot of work for government agencies around cost cutting and rethinking government policy around that, particularly around that global financial crisis time. And I think that got me thinking more intellectually around public policy and the impact of public policy on the public purse, but also on Kiwis' day-to-day life. So I think through that I got a little bit more exposure to government and a bit more acceptance that actually you can make a big difference in the public sector, and so that put me on a slightly different path from then on.
Indeed, and I had a conversation with Dr. Don Brash last time as well, and he talked about the GFC quite briefly and his perspectives too. So because this podcast is about self-improvement, I always ask my guests about their habits, their daily habits. For example, Dr. Brash wakes up at 6 a.m. in the morning and goes about his day. Do you have a certain way of doing things and habits that...
I think people are very habitual, and that is very much the case with myself. So for me, I start the morning with a bit of stretches, and in terms of time, that time can vary anywhere from 6 to 7, but always a few just stretching the body. The second thing is a pretty light breakfast, so typically a coffee and some fruit and some yogurt, and then catching up on the news before starting my day. So in terms of rituals at the start, that's pretty much the start of the day. The rituals at the end of the day is probably the same as in terms of coming home and having time to unwind and think about reflections of the day and what you did well, what you didn't do so well. I think that's pretty consistent with me on a day-to-day basis. So having time to actually reflect on the day and also think about the next day as well is really important.
So you focus on the time management quite vigorously, as in you stick to schedule all the time.
Oh, I'm not perfect, but I think the key thing with self-improvement is just always be prepared to review how things are going. And be prepared to provide a critique of your own time management, and then also think about the way forward and how you can improve. I think having an improvement or growth mindset is really important. Very, very strong on that growth mindset.
So self-evaluation, learn from your mistakes, move on, get better.
Correct.
Right. So were you, well, I already asked you this already, but were you always this driven? I mean, like, was it the bone cancer or was that crisis that led you to really push forward? Or
I was a pretty average student, in fact below average at high school. Always great with people. I was always the kind of most popular person in the class, but probably for the wrong reasons. So I'd say you could call me the class clown, I'd say. I think what changed definitely was the cancer. I think when you're faced with the prospect of your life being cut short or certain limbs of your body being taken away from you, it certainly puts you in a pretty unique perspective. So I think just realising that life is short and you want to make the most of your life that you have and make a difference has been a massive source of motivation throughout my life and continues to be so.
And even now, you're doing great work, obviously.
Yeah, thank you.
So if you had 3 books that you could recommend to people, what would those be, and how did those affect the young Dan Bidois?
So I wouldn't say there's 3 books that I can name off the top of my head, but I think if there's one publication that I'd recommend for viewers, it's The Economist magazine. If you're not an economist, The Economist magazine presents a great snapshot of what's going on in the world today and what the current challenges are. And we're living in a world now where everything is free in terms of content. Journalism is pretty poor at the best of times, but I really think that The Economist magazine stands up as pretty gold standard for what journalism should be in terms of informing you about the world and about what's going on from a political, economic, business or a social cultural perspective. I think it's probably the one magazine that I recommend to kids coming up, and if you've got any ambition and if you want to be informed about world affairs, then I'd say that publication is second to none. In terms of books, I think what comes to mind as an economist, I mean, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. It's
it's in my list.
Pretty important book to understand. I mean, this guy wrote in the 1700s an articulation of what the free market meant, and well before the free market was even crystallized. And I think even today, reading the source of what drives a country's prosperity, what drives communities and societies' growth and development, I think is a really key thing. So that is probably the standout book. I think there are a lot of other books out there, but I'd say The Economist and The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith.
So being aware of what the reality is, looking to the facts through The Economist, and also understanding about our so-called macroeconomic system via Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations.
That's right.
Right. So what was life in Harvard like? What was the key difference between New Zealand and the US when you were a student there doing your MPP?
So Harvard was a dream come true. I mean, I went through that university as a tourist, I think in 2004. Never in my dreams would I expect to have gone to study there what was essentially 6 years later. So I entered Harvard as a graduate school student, spent 2 years there, and it was a dream come true. So, studying under professors that write your textbooks that you've read about, that are just truly best in class globally. I think that's phenomenal. The second element was being being in classes with people from all around the world who are all very ambitious, proven leaders, and most importantly, proven to have potential to go far in their future. So I think learning from those types of people was an immense opportunity. And finally, just being in the US is just the US culture. US are very ambitious and very very positive culture to be around. So having a chance to experience the US culture and for all of its glory and faults as well. So the bad food and and the spring break tours and stuff like that. It was just fantastic privilege. So all up, I think Harvard is a fantastic experience. To go there and to have two years there was just a great privilege. But always bring it back to New Zealand. I mean, I always had a desire to come back to New Zealand, and I think Harvard just strengthened that desire to have the ability to come back and contribute, because not in every country do kids have the opportunity to fail, which I did, but also have the ability to come back on the rails later on and succeed in education. So I think that's something that we should be proud of as a country, that we offer the opportunity for New Zealanders who haven't succeeded in education to have a second go. We should continue to maintain that going forward, because I think that's a really important value of meritocracy, and that if at first you don't succeed, try again.
And you mentioned Adam Smith already. Did you have any other intellectual heroes that inspired you or got you going? In our conversation, our phone call, I mentioned Neil Ferguson. Were there people like that really got you intellectually stimulated?
Neil Ferguson's a great professor and a historian. He is at Harvard, or I'm not sure if he's there at the moment, but he might be at the Hoover Institute actually, which is in Stanford. But other professors or intellectual...
Pinker?
Stephen Pinker. I think Adam Smith is probably the classical thinker. I think even if you go further than that, Socrates or Plato, great philosophical thinkers around the role of the state and the role of the republic. But look, I think there were great professors here. I had an honours professor, Tim Maloney, who's also living in my electorate, who does a fantastic amount of body of research around the labour markets or labour economics. So he was great. Also, I'm just trying to think of a professor of mine at University of Auckland, Professor Peter Phillips, and he was a professor. He's a Stern professor at Yale, but also a part-time professor at the Auckland Uni, and his tale of being a PhD student in the US, and in economics, and just roaming the halls when you've got all the great thinkers of his day around the time as well. So in a nutshell, there's no one that stands out, but certainly I'm grateful to all the professors at the University of Auckland, but also those that I've studied under in other institutions as well.
That's brilliant. As a politics student myself, we hear a lot about Maori and Pasifika crime and unemployment rates in today's time, which is quite polarizing. You seem to have pushed against the stereotype as a Maori descendant yourself. So what messages and advice would you give to a minority or Pasifika student or young kid at the moment?
Well, in many cases, I was a stereotype. I grew up in in terms of the statistics, I'm Maori, and my parents were divorced. I'm also adopted. Had behavioural issues as a teenager, as a kid as well. So in many cases, I was heading down that stereotypical route that a lot of Maori and Pacific head down, which was pretty disengaged and ready to drop out, and I did drop out. Again, what happened for me was quite unique. I went through the cancer experience, which changed things a lot. I would hope that the solution to our problem of engaging in high school students is not for everybody to have cancer and have to go through what I've gone through. So I think the challenge for us as a society is essentially how do we show these kids that they've got potential, and give them the exposure of what they could actually go on and become if they just work hard and apply themselves. So I'm a big fan of things like exchanges. I went on exchange in my second year of university to California, and that opened me up to the US system, and I became pretty infectious with respect to the US education system. Second thing I'm a big fan of is exposure to the business world. So that is creating linkages between our high schools and the business community. So I had a part-time job when I was 14 in a butcher shop, and I got that part-time job because my principal connected me with that butcher who saw that I was going down the wrong path. So it was through that butchery job that I developed a bit of discipline, a bit of interest in the business world, and a taste for earning money, because ultimately it was great to take home a weekly paycheck and say that I earned that, and the direct correlation between effort and reward was established. So I think that's what we need to do is in schools where there's not a lot of people, where there's achievement issues, is find ways to engage with them in the business world, but also give them exposure to a little bit of a world outside where they live.
So more so-called equality of opportunity sort of direction.
Yep.
So when you look at your credentials, so I imagine a lot of people listening to this, they'll be wondering, my goodness, I mean, this is amazing. Like, so for an undergraduate student or any working professionals that are possibly aspiring to have something similar to your credentials, so what advice would you give to them? Is it networking? Is it volunteer activities? Is it finding a passion? In the words of Warren Buffett, what addition?
Well, I think for every kid out there, you want to make a difference. So I think that the key thing is establishing what you want to do with your life. And I would say to that, dream big. If your dreams are not big enough, then you're not thinking big enough. So I think you pays to have high aspirations. And I think for me, I always dreamt of getting a scholarship to study at a top tier university in either the States or the UK. So that was what I worked towards from the get-go. So I think when you set yourself high aspirations, the next thing you have to do is have a really strong work ethic to move towards those aspirations. And that's everything what you talked about, extracurricular activities, working hard and earning good grades in your classroom activities. But I think at the end of the day, it's just it's having that good mixture of aspiration followed up by a strong work ethic to get there.
So congruency between what you want and what you do.
That's right. Yeah, actions and aspirations.
And so, what is Dan Bidois' aspirations for the future from now on?
Well, look, I've just been elected in the last 5 months as the MP for Northcote, and it's a fantastic privilege to represent this community. It's a tight-knit community with a lot of history, with the same values that I have, which is, quite frankly, is get government out of the way, let me get on as an individual and improve my own lot in life, just stay out of my way. And I think that that's reflective of this community. There's a lot of hard-working Kiwis, a lot of small business owners. We've got some fantastic companies in this electorate, and they just want to be given a shot to get ahead in life, and they want big government out of the way. So I think from that perspective, just really being a strong local MP is my priority at this stage, and getting national back into government. So that's a desire, and it's a great chance to just get out there in the community and engage with the community in opposition, because you just don't get that time in government when you're just trying to do things. So I spend a lot of my time actually going around talking and listening to people in the community. I've just come from a meeting with 2 school principals, so it's a privilege to have the opportunity to listen to their hopes and aspirations and what they want improved in government in the future. So that's my priority, and that's the aspiration I have in the future.
And that's fair enough. Do you have a social media account or something that my followers could find you on?
Yes, add me on Facebook, Dan Bidois MP. I'm on Instagram, Dan Bidois MP. I'm on Twitter, Dan Bidois MP. So just look me up on all forms of social media, and if you're a Northcote resident, come into the office. I'm in Birkenhead up in Rawini Road, so feel free to pop in the office, say hi. But good on you for getting out there doing things like this podcast.
Oh, thank you.
And happy to come on to the show today.
That's brilliant. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave the descriptions and Dan Bidois social media accounts below. And thank you for listening. Kia ora and goodbye.